Alright guys, what's up? This is the second episode of the 6th gen build. We're going to be doing quite a lot today. We're going to be doing the 5-lug conversion, the true heart adjustable upper control arms to adjust camber, the median rear adjustable I forgot what they're called, to adjust the rear camber, black house OEM headlights, Wings West rear lip kit, and install the new wheels. So let's take a look at what we have. So those are the OEM black house headlights with the LED switchbacks. Right there is the handbrake cable that is needed for the 5-lug conversion. Those are the new wheels that we are going to install, and I'm already set up what I need to do today's work. So we have the V6 6th gen sedan complete spindles. Here are the True Hearts, adjustable upper control arms, function form type 1 coilovers. They're originally red, but I painted them black to give it a little bit of more of an appeal. And let's see what else we have here. And here we have the Wings West lip kit complete. So, as well as new brake pads for the 5-lug conversion. Do everything right the first time. And these are the Megan. And unfortunately, the hardware on it rusted pretty bad, so I'm gonna have to replace it eventually. And I had painted them in Atlantis blue metallic. This is the color the car is going to be painted. It's gonna look really good once this car's painted. So I'm going to give you a walkthrough on how to do the 5-lug conversion, as well as how to install all these upgrades. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we are going to try to take this entire assembly down from the upper control arm all the way down to the bottom of the spindle down here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to break this loose, this bracket that holds the brake line in place. So FYI, since this is pretty difficult to do while recording, since I don't have a camera guy, I broke every nut loose already. So we're just going to remove these. By breaking everything loose ahead of time, it makes it so much easier for me. So now that this bracket is off, I'm going to go ahead and put these onto the new spindle for now. We'll just locate them here just to hold it in place. This bracket is going to have to be relocated. Not relocated, but it's quite in the way. However, the brake line you don't have to worry about upgrading because it reaches the V6 caliper. So, but what we're not going to do is we're not going to bleed the brakes yet. We're going to go ahead and remove the caliper first so that we don't make a mess. So there's the hardware for that. Put that there. Get to the lower one, which is right here. That's the lower one, and the upper one would be right there. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the lower bolt. Okay. You don't have to worry about mix matching them because they are both the exact same bolts. So there's not one that's for the top and there's not one that's for the bottom. They're both identical, so you have nothing to worry about there. Alright, now that it's loose, go ahead and That should allow me to remove it. And set it aside. We're going to set it back here behind the axle, just so it's held in place. Now what we're going to remove next is we're going to disconnect the steering rack. So that'll be this guy. This is there's also a cotter pin there. I had already removed it. So that's going to come off. Set it there. And it looks like the ball joint is ruptured on this car, so I'm going to have a new ball joint pressed in, but I'll save that for another day. So we're gonna go ahead and remove it. I really don't want to do that. I'd rather hit the nut. So another trick you can do so you don't damage the threads is just put the nut back on so you have a bigger contact area to strike. There we go. So it has been removed. Kind of fought it for a little while, but it came out. Next would be to remove the lower ball joint. I already had broken the nut loose, so with the nut broken loose, I'll leave the nut actually in there so that I can strike it. Give it a nice strike, see if that pops up the seal, breaks the seal a little bit. Alright, next we're going to break the bolts that are on the top of the shock tower. These are the nuts that hold the entire shock assembly onto the chassis. So I already had broken them loose, so I'm going ahead and just remove them and set them aside. I'll set them over here for now. This will also relieve a little bit of spring tension as well. But the spring should be fully discharged by now, so there should be no tension. Alright, now that those are loose, now the entire assembly is loosened up a bit. Next, we are going to unlock the fork from the actual shock. So here's the fork. This is the bolt that locks the fork onto the shock. As you can see, there's quite some play there, so I already went ahead and broke this bolt loose. Now it's nice and loose. There is no spring tension, so as soon as I remove the bottom of the fork from the spring, the entire assembly, I should not get any kind of explosive reaction. So now we're going to remove the bottom of the fork from the bottom of this control arm right here. So go ahead and break this loose. And let's see what happens. There you go. No spring tension, just the weight of the shock itself has dropped. So now that the entire shock is removed, You don't want to lose your hardware, so it's always best to keep them together. Okay, so the entire shock is now loose. Now what's next is to break the upper control arm. Break those loose. Those are 14mm bolts. They are quite difficult to get to, so with your average wrench you'll get in there, but you will wrestle it with it. So I broke them loose already. Not easy, but they came apart. So they're still pretty tight, but it's manageable. Now this is also under a little bit of tension, only because of the weight of the entire assembly. So as soon as I remove them, all this is going to fall forward, well, fall down. So I guess I'll skip for this part. Alright, broke them both loose. Now this entire assembly is now loose. As you can see, they come off, but I'm going to stick it there because what's next to do, which is a step that I kind of forgot to do first, remove the axle nut. I already broke it loose. So we're going to push the axle in. Okay, now we'll set this guy right here. Now I'm going to pull this entire hub out. Well, actually, I need to make sure this guy is broken free. The ball joint is still somewhat pressed against this lower control arm right here. So I'm going to have to smack that with the hammer to break it loose. And then we'll get all this removed. Matter of fact, before you start doing anything to the car, before you even put it on jack stands, you should break this axle nut loose first. And it's very, very tight. You will fight it. So prepare yourself for this. In case you don't know what size that is, save you the trouble. It is a 36mm nut. 36mm. So in case you don't have that socket, go ahead and get it. I suggest you get a black one. Obviously I bought the wrong one. Luckily I didn't break it, because I did put quite a lot of force on this socket. Okay, here we have everything removed. The entire assembly has been completely removed from top to bottom. So the only thing that's left hanging there is the axle and, you know, the end link right there for the power steering, the steering rack. I actually had to fight the lower ball joint since it did not want to come out. It was so seized up in there that I actually had to remove the entire lower control arm. In order for me to do that, I had to remove these two bolts right here. The bolt that's on the other side of this end link, which is here. So these are 3/4 inch bolts, and on the other side here is a 14mm bolt, and back here would be a 17mm bolt. So these I had to remove as well to get the entire assembly out and physically hammer the living shit out of the ball joint to pop out. And instead of the ball joint popping out, the entire ball joint popped out of the socket that it was pressed in. Anyway, so that was a long fight with that lower ball joint. So now let's start to assemble the actual coilover. And here we have the coilover and the the fork right here. Notice that there is a groove carved into this. That is to compensate for the bolt that's passing through the fork. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to slide this in here. Fairly easy. not with one hand, but do with what I can. There we go. So now this coilover is ready to install. Okay, next step here, we're going to install the adjustable upper control arm. Now be sure you do this step before you actually install the coilover, otherwise the spring on the coilover is not going to allow you to give you enough room to run the mounting bolts into the chassis. So what I did was I had just left it nice and loose. However, I did fasten this end that bolts the bottom of the shock to the fork, and the fork to the lower control arm. That's all fastened and tightened. And I left that up there loose, as you can see. And instead of fighting the tension on this bar and the sway bar, I'm just gonna have the jack do the work for me. Now be careful that when you get there, always keep an eye on where the jack is and make sure it does not slide. The bottom of the lower control arm does not slide off the jack, otherwise you can risk yourself getting hurt and make a lot of noise and scare yourself. So I'm going to install this now. It's fairly easy, you know, just the same way as you remove the factory one. I did, however, leave the adjustable part loose where the ball joint is, and lucky for me, this ball joint is in good condition. It doesn't seem to be ruptured or anything. The seal is pretty nice. So I'm gonna go ahead and install this now. Now we're gonna install the V6 assembly, the entire spindle. So this is where the upper ball joint goes, which is going to line up with that sucker right there. And the lower ball joint here is going to line up with what's down there. So I'm going to have to release the tension on the jack so that I can install it. And as far as axles goes, both V6 and the 4-cylinder all have the same thread pitch, I guess you could say, or the same spline pitch. So you don't have to worry about trying to change your axles or anything like that. They slide right in. They're interchangeable with one another. So off to install. Should be fairly easy. Right here, this is where this end link to the steering rack will go through. The lower ball joint there, upper ball joint here. I mean, the caliper is already installed, so it's literally just upper ball joint, lower ball joint, and power steering ball joint. Fairly easy to install. So here it is, fully assembled, tightened V6 6-gen Accord sedan caliper, 5x114 bolt pattern. This is kind of an upgrade from the 4 lug since the rotor is slightly bigger. Calipers are about the same size, but rotor's a little bit bigger. So I went ahead and disconnected the old brake line. You know, no need to explain that, very easy. As well as hook up the bracket back. Everything has been tightened down. Everything is fastened. Everything has been fastened, as you can see. So there it is. All that's left now is to throw the wheels on. Well, that's just for one. I still need to do the rears. So here's a tutorial on how to do a 5-lug conversion on the front, as well as install coilovers, install upper control arms, and of course the main point, installing the spindles from the V6 Accord. You can also use the V6 Coupe Accord spindles as well. It's a bolt-on application. That's what I used on my other cord. The 5-lug conversion came from a coupe. This one, I got lucky and it just came from a sedan, but it wouldn't have made a difference regardless. Now we're set up to do the rear. So we have the drum here, and we have the rear complete hub, or spindle, whatever you want to call it. So completely factory assembly. So what we are going to do is we are going to unbolt everything from this multi-link suspension. We're going to disconnect the one of the upper control arms. We're going to unbolt from here. We're going to bolt the other upper control arm. Since I have the Megan camber kit, I'm not going to bother trying to waste my time with this ball joint. I am just going to disconnect it from up there so that it comes out with the whole assembly. We're going to connect all 3 of the lower control arms. This one right here, that one that's back there, and the one that's right here. All this is going to be disconnected, and of course unbolt the top of the strut. Now to get to that, you would have to go into the inside, remove the plastic panel that is inside. Let me show you. I already had done the other side. So you have to unbolt, bring the seat down, remove this section here. I don't want to touch it because my hands are dirty. Remove this plastic cover. Be careful. Don't make the mistake that I did. I was too aggressive with it and I ended up breaking mine. So now I have to replace that. But once you remove it, you have access to the struts. You don't have to necessarily take this off, but I do it just so it's easier to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and start removing everything, and you do not have to worry about any kind of spring being loaded because the vehicle is completely in the air on both sides, so the suspension is fully relaxed on both ends, so there's no precaution needed. So I'll do what I can with what I have, and let's go. So everything has been removed, and I cleaned up a little bit as well because I do not like working with all my parts messy. So this is what it looks like. The drums are down there, and this is where I am going to mention that you need the e-brake cables from the V6 as well, because the handbrake cables, the ends are different from the disc brake versus the drum brake. For the drum, the end of the cable actually goes into the drum, where on the disc it's just a lever you see right here, similar to like a lever on a bicycle brake in a way. You know, this mechanism works here, and it opens up the shoes that are inside the hat and rotor. So fairly easy. Do note that once you remove the brake line, you know, so it doesn't bleed and stain your floor, just set a napkin or a paper towel or a towel to absorb the loose dripping brake fluid. So now we are going to reassemble. Fairly easy. You do everything in the reverse order that you did to remove the factory setup. But first things first, we are going to install the coilover. So that's going to go first, and then everything else will just fall into play. So here's a complete assembly. Everything has been installed, everything has been fastened, nothing was left loose. So when you do yours, be sure to not leave anything behind. Make sure everything has been fastened. And another note, The one thing that might be left behind would be the end link here. Be sure to not forget about that, since it is usually somewhat tucked away, hidden there. And a good idea to use is, just like the front, use the jack and lift it from right here. Lift it up. Once everything is installed, lift it up to guide the shock into its hole, so you're not fighting the tension between all three of these bushings right here. They all have a slight preload put on them. They all want to naturally point downward or upward depending on which one it is. Some like to point down, some like to go up. So and you don't have to fight them. Use the jack. Be sure to tighten your brake line if you can. As an extra safety precaution, use Teflon tape. I didn't use Teflon tape, but I will do it once I bleed the brake system. But before I begin to do that, I still have the forelug still connected via e-brake cable inside the vehicle. So what I'm going to have to do is, I am going to have to tear the center console out to get to the mechanism under the handle, and then from there remove them and connect the V6 e-brake cables. So here you have it. I'll do a small how-to procedure in a minute. Till then, I just need to tear the interior up so that I have room to work with. So now we have the interior, well, most of it somewhat taken in out of the way. We are going to now disassemble the e-brake cable from the drum brakes. So note, you do not need the actual handbrake. All you need is to remove that bolt right there and loosen it, as well as the one that's right next to it. You do not have to worry about that union right there. Leave it as B. Once you remove these two cables, unlock them from being bolted into the chassis, you can start loosening them up, and just like a bicycle brake cable, you just turn and it just slides right out. So if you're familiar with bicycle cables, this is a walk in the park. Now these cables do dive through the interior, and they do dive under, where you will see in a minute. And there we have the cables, and here it is. Right there. And from there it turns, and that is where these weather sealed boots to keep rain, water, moisture, dirt, dust out from the interior. So once you remove those two bolts, as I mentioned, which are right there and right there, once you break those loose, the cable should just give a tug and pull. And not to mention, don't forget about these brackets either. There's a couple brackets here and here, as well as here. So break those loose and you should be fine. Break them all loose, which is what I'm going to do right now. Excuse the horrible camera angles. I do not have a tripod or a cameraman to help me out making this video, so I am doing this all on my own. So bear with me. As time goes on, I'll get a tripod, and eventually maybe I'll have someone that's willing to help me make these videos a little bit more user-friendly and easier to understand and visualize. So let's start tearing this interior out, this cable out. So here we have the cables installed. As you can see, right there is your adjustment. That little bolt right there, you would tighten or loosen to adjust the tension of the cable itself. And that would adjust for both cables. So they are tightened quite evenly. I already had installed the cable. Excuse how gross and nasty it looks right there. So fairly easy. You just do the exact reverse of what you did to remove the factory cables that were attached to the drum brakes. Very easy. You just do the exact reverse. Everything bolts into place. So this summarizes the end of the video. Here, this is how we do the 5-lug conversion. Coilover install. Camber kit install with west lip install. I didn't make a video on that because it's, again, self-explanatory. Headlight install. Again, self-explanatory, quite easy. But if you really want me to do a video, I can do a video on those. If you request it, I'll do it. Also, what else was done? So here's the car as it's comes to an end. So the next video would be installing the turbo kit. But before I do that, I need to prepare all the piping, the manifold, the turbocharger, intercooler, couplers, clamps. Make sure I have all those parts on hand and ready to install before I actually get into it. The next big install that's going to go in this car is going to be this right here. I figured I'd share it. Unfortunately, I can't install it because I do not have an engine hoist anymore. So this is what I've been working on the past couple days. This is a Euro R T2W4 LSD gearbox. This gearbox is really short gearing, so this car would be quite a lot quicker than the standard long gearing that this car comes with. I also painted it satin black so it stands out a little bit nicer, and I also upgraded the hardware to Downstar full transmission hardware kit. I originally ordered it in teal, but however the teal was a little too light for my liking, so I went ahead and painted it Atlantis blue. This is the color that I am going to paint the car. So the little details that count. So this will probably be installed about a week from now or so, or 2 weeks. Then after that it's installed, I could probably start working on some of the interior work, such as that boot shifter. I'm going to be playing with a little bit of designer fabric material. Do not worry, I'm not going to wrap the entire interior with this stuff. I don't want it to look too cheesy, just a little bit of accents here and there so it stands out and looks nice. I'm going to be using this fabric to do the shift boot. I am going to replace that Bride dashboard cover. Actually, I'm going to sell it, so if anybody's interested in it, I'll post an ad up to sell it. It is quite faded, so it's not very pretty looking, and I am going to buy a new one, and I'll have this upholstered onto it, as well as the ribbon that's going to go right down the middle between the shifter all the way along. I might do the ceiling as well, but I haven't decided. As far as I know, only the fabric is only going to go on the shift boot and the dashboard cover. The rest of the interior is going to be a slow work in progress. I might install the Euro R rear seats. I just need to do a little bit more research. to test the fitment, if it does fit or not. I will eventually do the door panels, but for now, the door panels are fine. The steering wheel will be redone in carbon fiber, as well as some of the interior panels are going to be done in carbon fiber as well. So this was I had a good time doing this tutorial. I hope everybody learned a thing or two. I've never done anything like this before, so however, if there's any requests that you might want, feel free to direct me, inbox me at my Instagram account. Also, if there's any requests, video tutorial requests, feel free to inbox me or place a comment on the video. Of course, I'm not really much of the camera person, but I figured I'd do something for the 6th Gen Accord community. So, until next time, this summarizes this chapter.